Among those who have contributed significantly towards the evolution and growth of the Sathya Sai Service Organisation of New Zealand, Richard Wallis shines as a beacon of light. His deep understanding of Swami's teachings, aided by his wide spiritual knowledge, enabled him to be the same in pleasure or in pain, in victory or in defeat, and at all times to keep his heart quiet and calm in the peace and tenderness of love. This served as a great asset for the organization, especially in its formative years. It also taught members the great quality of facing the ups and downs of life with equanimity and being firm in their faith. He often emphasized that Swami's teachings hold pearls of wisdom and truth, and these same treasures are within each and every one of us, and that all that we have to do is to cherish and practice these. Moreover, he was ever willing to share his knowledge and skills with others and to help them in practical ways. His facile communicating abilities, insightful knowledge of other religions, the Sanskrit language, and the practice of light meditation, broad-mindedness, universal approach, humility, and empathy, along with the ability to see the divinity inherent in the other person, have contributed greatly to its shaping the character and direction of our organization and to mark him as a true spiritual leader. He had a special passion for the spiritual education of children and found the ideal curriculum he sought for in Swami's Educare philosophy. He did his best to promote Educare through helping in the mobilization of SSE teachers and working closely with them in conducting SSE classes, training seminars, and workshops, and in building good rapport with the parents. He played a vital part in the founding and conduct of the Rongamai Sai preschool and in building it during its formative years. As national president of the organization for 10 years, he traveled to almost every nook and corner of the country, contacting persons from all walks of life and promoting the spread of Swami's teachings through informal personal talks and structured workshops and exhibitions. During these years, he built the structure of the organization and made his influence felt among spiritual aspirants throughout the country. In 1988, for Swami's 73rd birthday, a group from New Zealand went to Prashanti Nilayam to attend the first overseas convention of centre chairpersons. This was led by Richard during his time as national president of New Zealand. His spiritual vision helped him to gather co-workers imbued with the same vision and gave the Sai organization life, light, and love in the form Swami would wish for. It is our fervent hope that the selfless example set by Richard will continue to inspire all the members of our organization.
Thank you, Richard, for coming along and taking your time to have this interview. Thank you very much. Sit down.
Pleasure.
Right. I'd like to know about yourself, your education and where you were born and something like that. How about your background?
Yeah, no, I was born in 1936 in a place called Johnstonville, which was north of Wellington.
So you're a real Kiwi?
I'm a Kiwi.
All right.
My father was English. My mother was second generation New Zealander. I was christened in an Anglican church at the age of about 4. And because my neighbours went to the Methodist church, I went to the Methodist Sunday school. As a young man, I was a hunting, fishing, shooting sort of guy.
Oh, yeah.
And I married when I was 25, and I went into a school of philosophy.
Was that in Wellington? Or?
I was in Wellington. And that had been started by Leon McLaren in London, who was a lawyer. And they started as a group looking for natural economics. And they realized that to go any further, they would have to study philosophy. And so they sought teachings from all over the world, and they came up with their own pattern. But I had left school at the age of 15 because my parents were aged. My father was 59 when I was born. And I realized that they couldn't really afford to keep me in education. And so at 15 I got a job at W&H Wallis, a tobacco company. And but I saw advertised these lessons in philosophy. Mm-hmm. And philosophy had always attracted me. I'd been in the library and I stood near the philosophy books and just felt the vibrations from them. And I never had opened the books. So I went along, and they taught practical philosophy. It wasn't a theoretical thing.
So how many were in the group?
I suppose there were about 40 people in the first class.
It's a good number.
Good number. They graded it. They had part 1 and then that led to part 2 and so forth. But in part 1 they gave an exercise, what they called the exercise. And they taught you could not be what you can see. You can see something is watching. So you stay with the watchman, as it was termed. And you would stand or sit for 2 minutes and gaze at something, see it in its detail, hear the sounds nearby, hear the further sounds. Just open all your senses and be aware. And if thoughts come to the mind, give them no attention, but just stay centered on the impressions from the 5 senses. And we do that for about 2 minutes.
So it's like a meditation, isn't it?
It was an introduction to meditation, really, but it had an enormous effect on me because I realized that at that stage I was living in my head, very much associated with, and I thought I was the voice in the head. And this gave the space to realize you're not the voice in the head. The mind is a tool and shouldn't be made a master. And we would go on a practical retreat. And I remember one retreat, the first retreat I went to, was for a week. And the emphasis was on giving attention to the working surface.
Was this retreat on the countryside or still
Yes, it
in the
was
city?
in Otaki Forks.
Oh, yep.
It was in an Anglican retreat centre. It was actually set up by my father-in-law, the Reverend Harry Squires at the time, who had passed on. And I took it very seriously and worked hard at it. And then about the 6th day, I was cutting bread at 4 o'clock in the morning, preparing the breakfast. And I just went, and I was doing it with attention, not slow, but cutting the bread quite quickly, but being right there where it was happening. And I just went into bliss. I was just, there were tears coming out of my eyes, they were just tears of bliss.
Just like that,
Yeah, I would have cut bread for eternity. I became a tutor in the School of Philosophy. And once again, I took the part 1 class.
So what was part 1 involved?
The new entrants.
Oh, yes.
And we had two part 1 classes, and there was a doctor from the Auckland University who was taking the other class. But by the end of the term, and I'm not saying this egoistically, it was just a fact, he would have a few students and I'd have a room full. But, and one of my students was Madeleine Gilliman.
In Wellington?
Yes,
okay.
That's how I met Madeleine.
Oh.
And in one of the classes she gave an example of something that was worrying her, that her family had a batch in Maharangi.
So what year was that?
That would be probably about 1966, 67, around the mid-60s. And she had two younger sons, Bruno and Simon. And to get to the batch, they had to go across the harbour. And she was worried because the only way they could get across the harbour was by boat, and the boat was on the other side of the harbour. And I had just bought a small aluminium dinghy. And I said, well, no, I'll take you. I had a little seagull outboard on it. And so we did that.
So there were other people from Auckland too, or only Madeline came from
No,
Auckland?
just a Gilman family.
Oh, right.
And so we became very close friends. I met her husband, who was a marvellous man. He'd been in the underground in World War II with the French resistance. Very large yes man. They had it was lovely to sit at a table with them. And this large family, beautiful.
Eight kids.
And this wonderful father who so much experience, been through so much. And so Madeleine and I, we go back a long time. But the father eventually passed away, and I got married. I was married, and my first marriage broke up because I spent a lot of time in the School of Philosophy. I was there, worked 7 days a week, and my justification was that when I was young, my friends' fathers and uncles went off to war. Many of them never came back. And I said to my wife, look, the cause of war is in the mind. This study of philosophy, which is very practical, teaches us to control the mind. And if that can be done, there won't be any wars.
That's right.
And so I justified my enthusiasm to take. I always said yes. I was a yes man. You want me to teach geometry? I'll teach geometry. You want me to teach Vedic mathematics? I'll teach Vedic mathematics. You want me to lecture? I'll lecture. You know. But my wife went the other way. I took her for a walk in the bush once, and and I said, "This is the way," and she said, "No, this is the way." And I was right. The way I went was right, but it was almost a pattern of our lives because she went one way and I went the other, and eventually we split up. I was then transferred to Tarpary, just north of Hamilton. I was transferred to Hamilton, and I with Mobil Oil, who I worked for.
Okay.
And I was in charge of retail development for the Waikato, Bay of Plenty, all over that area.
Oh, how many years were you there?
I was there for 2 or 3 years in that area. I worked for Mobil for 37 years or more. I started in Wellington, and then I was transferred to Auckland, and I was transferred to Waikato. And I lived on this farm, and I would drive up from the farm and take classes and drive back to the farm. The school had quite a hard regime. You had to. McLaren was, to me, was like a Swami. I hadn't met Swami at that stage, but to give you an example, I was told once in a lecture, he looked at me and he said, "Cold baths are enlightening." And so I went and had cold baths midwinter. And after one very hard day in digging and working in the grounds, I decided I'd have a hot bath, so I had a lovely hot bath. I sat down in front of him and he said, "I said cold baths." So
Yeah.
I went back to cold baths, and in Telbury I would get up on there'd be ice outside. I get up and have a cold bath.
It's a cold place, eh?
Yeah. But I came back, then transferred back to Auckland, and I remarried, and we had 2 children. And then I did a lot of running in my younger days, and I was running with a doctor friend of mine, Jonathan Cutner, on the Coromandel Peninsula.
Oh, yes.
And I looked across and I could see 2 of him. And I said, Jonathan, when I look over, I see 2 of you. He said, you should see a doctor. So I just persisted, and when I was backing down a driveway, my mother-in-law's driveway, I could see 2 curbs.
Yeah.
And so I rang him and he said, you really should see a specialist, and he made an appointment for me. And the specialist had a CT scan done. And then he said, look, you've got a small brain tumour. Nothing to worry about. I'll get an appointment with a surgeon, he'll just take it out. So I saw the surgeon, and he said, they've told you about it, haven't they? And I said, yes, it's a small tumour and you can just take it out. He said, no, it's totally inoperable. And the reason why you're seeing double is it's compromising the nerve that controls the right eye. But he said, I'd like to take a biopsy. So I rang my friend Jonathan Cutner and told him, and he said, well, I'd have a second opinion. So he made an appointment for me to see Dr. Wrightson, who was the head neurologist at Auckland Hospital. And he looked at me and he said, well, you've had this thing for a while. If it was malignant, you wouldn't be here now.
That's right, yeah.
So I would suggest you just leave it. And if it gets worse, we can control it with medication. And he said, if you had a biopsy, it means putting a hole in your skull and putting something into your brain to take this out. And he said, not worth the risk. So I then went to London to see an Ayurvedic doctor.
Oh, yeah.
And he sent me to Harley Street to see a surgeon.
What year was that?
Oh,
70s? Oh.
it'd be in the 70s, yeah. And the surgeon said, look, I could remove it, but I would paralyze half your body. And so I came back to New Zealand, and Madeleine, but in this time, had gone to see Sai Baba.
Oh, yeah.
And she came back and said, Richard is God. And I said, Madeleine, you're God. I'm God. There is only God. What do you mean this man's God? But she convinced me to go over. And I went on my own to Purupati and had the first darshan with Baba.
So that was your, okay.
And during my years, for some 20 odd years in the School of Philosophy, I'd read all of the Indian classics. I read the whole of the Mahabharata, the whole of the Ramayana, and I'd read them both aloud because I saw somewhere in the book that this must be read to somebody. And I thought, well, if I'm just skim reading it, I'm not reading it to anybody.
So really in depth.
Reading it to myself. So I was living on my own. I read it as a cat. I had a cat on my knee in the morning. I used to get up very early. And I'd just read this to the cat. But, and it was a very good preparation for what I found when I went to India. And when I saw Baba, I burst into tears. And I noticed a tear go down his face as well.
Right. How many days you stayed in Prashanti?
I stayed there a month.
Okay.
And I was there 2 weeks, and then he went away. And I stayed. And it was rather lovely because the crowds went away. And you could get straight into the Spiritual Heritage
right.
Museum. And really, and you would get into the Mandir. And someone said, what's it like with Baba not here? I said, he's here, his body's just gone. But I came back to New Zealand, and I was asked to talk at Baba's birthday. John Peel was the chairman of it, and there was only one centre in Auckland. And it's called the Auckland Centre, it's now the Mount Eden Centre. And he asked me if I would speak at the birthdays, which I did. And then I went back to the School of Philosophy, and they had what they call the beginning of term lecture. And they were all dressed in dark suits, and I thought, this is the 1930s. It didn't have the energy and the vibration that Sai had. And I said, I'm sorry, I'm going to resign from the school. I'm going to move to the Sai organisation.
So this is you were still meeting in the bookshop, or this is after the bookshop?
No, by this time they were meeting in the Friends Hall. And
it's in the basement.
No, they in the main room. I'm not sure where they had their annual general meeting, but I went to this annual general meeting, and one of the gentlemen present said, I will move that we withdraw from being a Sai centre and just become a devotional singing group. And I said, well, if you do that, you're going to deny New Zealand the wonderful education system that Sai has, the service activities that he does. I said, it will be a great waste and a great shame. And I finished up being the chairman of the then Auckland Centre. And then I was rung by the central coordinator from Australia, and he said, look, we'd like you to form
the council,
a central council and a national organisation.
So that was in early 1980s, was it?
That would probably be in the late 80s, early 90s. And so I did that. We gathered together a group of people. And with my job with Mobile, I travelled a lot. And I would pop in and see people and encourage them to form groups or centres. And it was interesting because I got an invitation to go to, I was walking, I was in an office in Auckland, and in Grafton Road, I think it was. But I went down to the K Road and got some fruit for my lunch. Came back and to the office to have my lunch, and there were a group of people looking at the race books and race form. And one of them said, my uncle's got a horse going to win this big race. Yeah. And so I looked at the book, and when I was younger, I had spent quite a bit of time studying races. And I said, well, I think these two have got a good chance. And then later that afternoon, one of the engineers, he picked me up. And we were looking at service station sites in the North Shore. And we came to an intersection, and there was a TAB on through corner. And the doors were open, and they were so inviting. I said, well, just pull in with you, I'm going to have a bet. And so I took Uncle's horse and the two horses I liked for a trifecta. Never thought anything more about it. Came home, just switched on the radio, and for no reason at all, but the race was being run. And I said to my wife, I've just won the trifecta. And she said, well, the pay. I said, oh, $200. Paid $1,000 for my dollar.
That's a good amount.
And that very day I got an invitation to go to a Sai conference in Adelaide. And I said, I'm going. And my wife, Marianne, at the time, said, we can't afford to go. You know, you can't afford that. I said, it wasn't even my dollar. So I went to this marvellous conference, and yes. What impressed me, having just come out of this school of philosophy, which at that stage was very hierarchical, you know, to see Jack Hislop just standing in the queue for his lunch. And no hierarchy, you know, it was, and to get these wonderful stories.
So what year was that? No,
it was. I'm not certain of the year, I must confess. Probably in the 90s, somewhere. Okay. But it was a great chance. I met Lorraine Burrows, Atong Jungsai, Arthur Hillcoat, the lovely Howard Murfitt, Jack Hislop, you know.
Oh, the historical people.
Yeah, yeah. And it was a delight to see people of a similar culture trying to come to grips with how to use.
So it was a good motivation for you.
Yeah. And I did say, you can't take the Indian tree and plant it in New Zealand soil. You must have something that is suitable for this country, this climate. And so it was nice to see people with the same problem. And Lorraine, of course, was inspiring with her education. So I then began to, and Jagadish said this was the quickest promotion he'd ever seen. But it gave me the chance to invite these people, and they all came to New Zealand for our conferences after that.
That's right. Yeah.
And things grew. And Lorraine would come, and her and I would go around the country doing EHB.
Yeah, maybe she came with Bruce. Yeah.
Yeah. And then Prinny came to New Zealand, and she had such a lovely energy. I went to Madeleine's with Prinny. We were both working here in the SSE classes, children. And it was quite a big job. And I had thought we'd start doing the photocopying and things, and we'd come back another day and finish it. But I could see it, Prinny wasn't going to stop until thing was finished. And so I asked her if she'd take on the role of...
So Prinny was ex-student of...
ex-student from
Prashanti.
She'd been through Science University. Yeah. Her mother was the eye doctor in Budapest.
Yes, he's still in the hospital.
And so Prinny became the national spiritual convener. And she was a tower of strength, and we went around having public meetings and doing things. And gradually the organisation grew. Arthur eventually asked me if I would step down as chairman of the organisation, and if I would start an institute of Sai education. So I founded that with the help of a lawyer called Krish, and we started the Institute of Sathya Sai, or education.
Yeah. So that we can talk about the Otara school. That's how it all started.
Yes, the Otara school started with. We had largely through Moginaga. We had made contact with the school, and we'd been invited to run a values class once a week at the school. And we had a team, some of them quite elderly, one of them on crutches, would come and do a values class with the story, the song, the activity, the silent sitting. And it was so successful that the school asked us if we would start a play centre. So we did. And Jenny Peel was the first person. And then we registered that as a licensed preschool. ASB Bank were very helpful. They gave us quite big grants to change the building and get it ready for a preschool. And that worked very well indeed.
Were there any difficulties of trying to get the EHV into the other schools through the government? I remember you prepared some pamphlets on that.
Yeah, when stage the government were asking for submissions on the national curriculum, and I put in I wrote pages on it, and on values education and why it should be included. And that went on their website. And values are included now in the New Zealand national curriculum. Whether we had anything to do with that, I don't know. But there was always a reluctance from schools to take it on. There was a group in somewhere down your way. But the brain tumour began to cause problems, and I was having grand mal seizures. And by this time we were doing teacher training, and we'd been fortunate enough to get the Institute of Sathya Sai Education in England to get their material, which I believe was very good material. And the proof of that was it was very successful in England, and they had put out a video with headmasters of all sorts of schools in England praising this program.
Yeah, I've seen that website. It's quite well done.
And it related to our community. So I'd be running teacher training sessions or being part of the training team, and I'd go home and have a grand mal seizure. But funny enough, the surgeon that was looking after me, or supposedly looking after me, I went to see him, and he said, "I can do nothing for you. You're far too frail. Just go away and make use of what time you've got left." And so I had remarried because my second marriage had broken up, largely because while I was busy saving the world through Sai, my wife found a younger man, and these things happen. And I had remarried my Frida, who I'd met when I was 17 and she was 16.
Oh, yeah.
And we both had 2 marriages. But she came and lived with me and nursed me through a double hip replacement done at the same time, 2 hips at the same once, and all these seizures, and a crook knee. But we moved to Christchurch. And
that's about 5 years ago. You moved to Christchurch.
Yeah, we went in 2010, so 6 years ago.
Yeah.
And the Christchurch have a centre, and the president of that was a professor at the university in Christchurch. Nilakant.
Yeah.
He found another guru, and the guru was very generous to him. He took, he invited him to India and took him around and showed him things. So I was asked to take over that role, which I did. So I'm currently the president of the Christchurch Centre, which is a small but growing centre. And I've been very inspired by Jigger's talk last night. And I can see ways of networking Sai's teaching, because I do believe, and I have a vast background in looking at various religions. I studied them all. And Sai does give us so much spiritual wealth. In fact, the old Mr. McLaren, way back in the School of Philosophy days, said, "You'll be very rich." Well, I'm not. I'm almost appalled. But what I think
spiritually rich.
Spiritually rich.
Yeah.
With all this vast rare material.
We are in the Sai house here today.
Yes.
So tell us how it all started. What was the background?
Well, at that time I was the national president of the Sai organization, my day job was working with Mobil Oil, and I was the real estate manager for Auckland. And Mobil then had a service station where those townhouses now are, and we were keen to put in a car wash. And so I purchased this from Mobil Oil. But the car wash didn't proceed. We were renting it to students. And I kept getting a ring on the telephone. And this chappie said time and time again, I want to live in that house. I want to live in that house. In hindsight, I wonder if it was Swami. And then someone said, I got another ring, you've got to go and see what's happening in that house. So I went to the house and had a look, and the students were taking the match, lighting off the walls and using it for firewood. So we kicked them out, and the house was done up. And then I said to the management of Mobil, I said, I know a group that would look after that place. And so we rented it for some time. And because I likened us to Arabs in the desert, we would pitch our tent and then we'd be gone. Yeah. And no one knew really where we were. So we needed something that was stable, a base. And this seemed to fit the bill well. It's well sited, it's got parking at the back.
It's quite central to everybody.
It's not a huge place, but I think it's limited to a certain number of people. It served us well. And then Mobil decided that they wanted to sell it because they weren't going to go ahead with the car wash.
Yeah. They
decided that the service station was too close to the lights. This was one bit of land I didn't buy. It was bought by Atlantic, which was a sister company.
Yeah.
So when I heard it was for sale, I said, well, the group in there might be interested in buying it. And so we had a meeting, and we looked around. I sent a piece of paper around and said, if you're willing to put in something towards a deposit on this thing, just note it so we can see if we've got enough support. And there was enough support to get it. And I said to Madeleine after that, I said, but how are we going to pay off the balance? Because and we got it for a very good price. We got about 75,000 from memory. I'm not exactly certain. That was a long time ago. And Madeleine said, don't worry about it. I get so much from my father in Switzerland or somewhere. I'll pay off 12,000 a year. So that would cut it out quite quickly. So we went ahead. We didn't know we weren't supposed to borrow money, but we'd gone to the bank, and it was almost as though I was being directed, because after we'd spoken to the bank manager, he said, now your next duty is this. And we had to form a trust, because they had to have a trust.
Yeah, obviously, yes.
And we formed the Sathya Sai Education and Service Trust. And that was the vehicle we used to purchase that property.
I can recall, I think it was way back in 1998 when we went to Prashanti for the first, it was called the first Chairman's Conference.
Ah, yes, yes.
Yeah. So can you tell us more about that? How many times have you been to Prashanti?
I went about 8 times. 8 times.
So can you give us some experience on your visits to Sai Baba?
Yeah, well, the first one was beautiful. And the rest just sort of followed in the line of duty, really. That first one I had a strange experience. I was put in a shed, and I was given a bed right inside, just beside the door.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, this is going to be terrible in the middle of the night, people coming and going. So I got up and I moved down to the centre of the shed, and there's another sort of entrance, and I put my bed down there. And then the Sebadals came and said, oh, it's an Australian going to come and join you. And this fellow Peter came. No one seems to know much about Peter, but he parked beside me, and he said, this is no good, we'll get a roundhouse. Well, there weren't any rooms in the roundhouse available, but we shifted to the roundhouse. And then he said, this room's no good, the mosquito netting's all broken. So we got another room in the roundhouse. And I went off to get my whites for the, and as a very young man, I had played a lot of tennis. And my mentor was William Tilden. I had his book. And I studied that and I patterned my game on his book.
Yeah. And
nobody knew that but me. But when I come in with my whites, Peter says, what are you going to do? Play tennis like William Tilden? Like Will Tilden.
Yeah.
And he seemed to know everything about me. And one night he said, there was a full moon night. In the Upanishads it says, by my moonbeams I nourished plants. And I felt this nourishment from this moon. And I said to Peter, I said, I think I'll sleep out tonight under this full moon. And there's another chap in the room, a South African, and he said, don't scorpions and snakes and anything out there, don't take the risk. But so I just lay down on my bed, which was by the door. And Peter poked his head in and he says, I thought you were sleeping out tonight, you go and sleep out. So I just picked up my mat and went out and slept under the moonlight. And I really didn't get any sleep, but I just meditated the whole night. And when I got up in the morning, I put my foot down and I was just Om, Om, Om. And so I went up and then I went out and meditated on the Hillview Stadium.
All right.
I was just lying out on the bench. And a beautifully dressed Indian couple came up and said, don't sleep here, sir. Go and sleep over there by the, at the end of the Hillview Stadium. There's this lovely thing with and it's got the picture of Krishna and Arjuna in the chariot. And so I just lay there in the shade. And I just laid there and meditated. And I heard the celestial bhajan, and it was amazing.
Oh.
It was so clear and beautiful.
Was that in the night time? Or?
No, this was daytime.
Daytime, oh, okay.
Yeah, middle of the day. And I meditated all night and half the day. And then finally the bhajan finished with Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. And so I just got up and made my way back. And all the school children were coming out of the schools. They just walked past them. And then I went to later that afternoon, I went to get some money out of the bank and I'd forgotten to take my passport. And I said, look, I'm sorry, I haven't got my passport. He said, don't you worry. I said, no, you don't need your passport. So I don't know what all that was about, but it was quite magical.
You have involved a lot in meditation, so how?
Well, I learned meditation in the School of Philosophy, and that meditation, they taught us the meditation on Ram. And this was interesting because I'd been meditating for some time, and at that time the school checked your meditation. We had a meditation checker. I was one of those checkers for some time. I go to my checker and I said, look, I don't repeat Ram anymore. I just listen to the essence of the sound. And that seems to take me deeper. He said, no, you must repeat Ram, Ram, Ram. And on that very first trip to Buddhapati, they had a lecture for overseas visitors, and I was one of those, of course. And I went in and they made me sit right at the feet of the chap who was giving the lecture. And he came in and he said, oh, Dr. So-and-so can't be here today, so I'm taking the lecture. I don't know who he was. But he looked down at me and I know he gave me Sanskrit blessings. I don't know what that was about. At the end of the lecture, they started the Asato Ma mantra. And I had learnt the Asato Ma mantra in the School of Philosophy, but I never learned to chant it. And a friend of mine, Don Worrell, and I used to say it to each other, we'd say, Asato Ma Sadgama. typical Kiwi voice. And this lecturer looked at me and he said, he's got a good ear for Sanskrit if only you listen. And I listened. Asatoma Sadgamaya. And I realized it was this mantra.
Yeah.
And at the end of the session, once it was over, an English girl came up to me and she said, can you write that out for me in Sanskrit? And I said, yes, I can. So I went to the room and wrote it out in Sanskrit. And when I gave it to her, I said, where did you learn Sanskrit? What? And she said, I was in the School of Philosophy in London. And I said, well, I learned it in the School of Philosophy in Auckland. She said, it's only a preparatory school, you know. And it was, for me it was a preparatory school. And I think this organisation, if we do it right, have a vast opportunity, because, as I said at the meeting last night, never in the history of mankind has so much spiritual information been so readily available to so many.
So that brings me to the Swami's teachings. What's the key teaching that you have been practicing?
Love all, serve all, help ever, hurt never. And Swami has said these are the essence of the Veda. If you practice those, that is the essence of the Veda. And that we are all one. There's no... Christ said, I am in you, you are in me, I and my Father are one. Swami said, I am in you, you are in me.
Yeah, all the same teachings.
The same. But what they're talking about is this spiritual energy, this Dr. Rohana from Massey University.
Yes, he was one of the lecturers, one of the speakers during the conference.
Ah, yes, he'd written a lovely book, Spirituality Demystified.
Yes.
And in quantum physics now, they know that there is an intelligent nothingness. You can't see it, but it's there. And it holds all the atoms in place. And
science are slowly sort of becoming more spiritualized, aren't they?
Yeah. There's a Sanskrit saying I learnt in the School of Philosophy, Namo Rupaiva. Everything is held in name and form only. And so you've got this lovely bubble of energy that takes name and form. And I first saw that, it's hard to see it in human beings because they put up this mask of the personality. And I first saw that in the dog. I had a pet dog called Joshua. And I looked into his eyes and you could see the self reflected, looking back at you. And it was funny that before I went on that first time, I was taking Joshua for a walk, and I said, I'm going to India tomorrow. And I might be able to do something to the dogs there. You know? And that was a strange, it was an off-the-cuff sort of thing. Yeah. I always talk to my animals. And I got to India, and I sat under the meditation tree, and I always had two dogs on either side. But I read a book about the Maharishi. Not the Maharishi, one of the other great sages in India. And he had always said, feed the chaps first, then the devotees, then yourself. And the chaps were the dogs. There's a lot of wild dogs running around. And there was one dog on that ashram. It was the mangiest, it had no fur, just scaly skin. It had long claws, never been cut. But for some reason, as I walked backwards and forwards from the roundhouse to the darshan, to the roundhouse, to the canteen, this dog would look at me and he'd try and follow me.
Yeah.
And so I gave it down and I said, is there a vet anywhere around? I'll pay for the vet to look at this dog. And they sent me up to a village somewhere. And I went to the village and there wasn't any vet there. But a young couple, and I'd taken a mango, one of those big watermelon things. And but they took me into their house and we shared this, and they were spinners. They were spinning silk.
Oh, yeah.
And they were beautiful. But I still had no problem with this dog, and so once again I asked to save it down. He said, "Take it to your room, sir." So I thought, no, I can't take it to the room. So I got it a silver bowl and a stainless steel bowl from one of the shops.
Yeah.
And I got food from the canteen, and I set up a bed for it outside, up in the corner of the ashram,
Yeah.
where there was a bit of a flax tent of the thing, and I thought, no, he can stay there. And then a big dog, sort of pit bull dog, came up. And this other little thick scaly thing was only about that big.
Yeah.
The pit bull was huge. And the pit bull went to steal the food. And the little one looked up at him and went, and the pit bull took off. And he cut, and I looked at this little thing and I thought, you're no ordinary dog.
Yeah.
So I picked it up, took it back to my room,
All right.
and looked after it, cut its toenails.
Yeah.
Eventually I had to leave it because I was going back to New Zealand. I couldn't bring it back here.
So when was your last trip to Prashanti?
The last trip was around about 2000. So it was an education conference, and we took it. We actually paid for the fare of a couple of leading educators, and there's quite a big group of teachers. We went to that. It was originally sponsored by UNESCO.
Yeah.
And then UNESCO sent out letters to everybody who'd been nominated and told them not to go because Swami had been in trouble. And these people rang me, people I'd invited, and they said, what's this all about? And I said, well, it's nonsense. I said, that's what we think. Reading is nonsense too. They said he can't. The letter said he couldn't create miracles. He ended up his sleeve. Well, it's rubbish. So it was a good conference. Although UNESCO had withdrawn, and at the end of the conference we were given special seating, and Swami came round and gave us darshan. And he looked at me and he said, "Christian?" And I said, "Yes, Swami." And then his hand started to go, I looked up, I thought he was going to give me a booty, so I put my hands out like this. Yeah. I looked up and I saw the edge of this ring.
All right.
And
Can you show the ring to the camera?
Surely.
Oops. There we are, that's the ring. Oh, right, it's a cross.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he slipped it on. I put this hand up. I didn't have a wedding ring on at the time. He went, he must have known that Preeta was going to come back in my life. And he slipped it on this finger. And and then he went away and came back, and as he went past, he smiled at me and he said, "Perfect fit." And it was, and initially I thought perfect fit, but when he moved on from the physical body, I reflected on those last two words, Christian, perfect fit. And so when my wife suggested we start going to church, I said, yeah, why not? I can't really tell the Lord of the Universe I'm a Christian, and then never go to any one of their churches. So, and we don't hold any positions in the church, but we go and we take an active part in things.
Yeah, last night...
I send them... There are about 3 priests in the church we're in, and I send them all Swami's message every day. And if I don't, they remind me to send it.
Is there? Okay.
Yeah.
Last night you mentioned about that we should restart, the organization. So what do you mean by that? How the Sai organization in New Zealand can go forward?
I know when I was in Mount Eden, a new Maori lady came in, and she sat down and she stayed there for the bhajans, and she looked at me and said, "Do I have to learn a new language?" And then I mentioned the lady last night that who had done so much service in Guatemala, started school, done, help with health. And I thought she's so in tune with Swami's message in practicality, she might like to come to bhajan, so she came. And I'm not allowed to drive at the moment because I've had a seizure, and you can't drive for a year after you've had a seizure. So her name is Jenny, but she calls herself Mahia, and so she came, and on the way home I said, "How did you find it? I'd like to see this thing grow." And she said, "Well, I've actually been to one before. I went to one in Singapore." She said, "Yours was better than that because at least you've got a book and you've got translations." But she said, "Really, if you want to see this thing take off, you better start again."
Yeah.
And it's, as Jagga said last night, so often it's used as a substitute for a Hindu temple. And I had the opportunity with my daughter on the Friday night that they came up. She invited a couple of her friends across to do a meditation. And we did the meditation, and we talked, and I shared some of Swami's sayings with them. And they said, "Wow." And as they left, one of them turned to me and said, "Next time you come up, we do this again."
That's good.
But one of the things Jagga mentioned was just having people around, friends, family.
Yeah. This is how we can grow.
Neighbours. Just discuss this. Sit down and don't push it down their throats, but just mention it to them and see what they think of it,
Yeah.
Because the teachings can be very simple, and that's the reaction I get when I mention them in church.
Yeah.
One of the hierarchies in the Anglican Church on something, he said you could never put that into words, and I said I can do it in 4 words: love all, serve all, and he had no answer to that. Covered it.
What's your view on the youth? How the youth can be motivated to take active part in this organization in New Zealand?
I think we've got to. Youth have a different energy. We've got to make it interesting for them. Include it in some youthful activity that is vibrant, challenging.
Like musical concert or things like that?
Yes, yeah. I learned a lot in my young days from tramping. Going up into the bush and sleeping out, climbing the mountains. But the teachings still apply, and Swami, when I had Bernard Gilliman was the first youth convener, and he did a great job. He took a group to India, and I was fortunate enough to be there at that time. They had about 8 interviews. And they all walked in an orderly manner from their accommodation to the darshan. They all were dressed neatly. They presented themselves well. And Swami showed them enormous grace. Interview after interview.
Yes, that's good.
Manifesting rings for them. we started a group in Christchurch. There was an ex-student of Swami's, and he was there, but he's gone. He did a doctorate in Christchurch University, and then he's gone back to India, leaving behind a baby, and who is it called Sayara. And there's a beautiful temple I just went to do today. I don't know why we didn't make more use of it. It's in Pakuranga, and it's like a mini, the big temple in Purupati. There's a Sai Mandiram, which is the Purnachandra temple, and it's beautifully and tastefully decorated. I'm just amazed that we haven't made more use of it.
Well, I'm sure they will be. Were you in Christchurch when they had the earthquake?
I was. We moved down there in May 2010. The first earthquake was in September. It was a 7.5 earthquake. And my wife and I were in bed at the time, and it was pretty rough. But fortunately, there didn't seem to be too much damage. I live in an over 60s complex with 41 villas, one of which was a caretaker's, which is a two-story one. The others are all duplexes. And then the second earthquake was in February 2011. And that was enormous. It was far shallower. It wasn't as big a magnitude, but it was sharper and shallower and closer to Christchurch. And that caused enormous damage.
Yeah. The Sai Center is a small one in Christchurch, but were you able to do any service in regard to the earthquake? Helping people?
We did. We had people coming down from Wellington, and they just cold canvassed. They would go into the worst affected areas and knock on the door and say, look, we're from Wellington. We'd just like to offer you some prasadam, some food. And people were amazed.
So what do you reckon was missing? There were other organizations, giving food and other things, but was there anything additional was required in terms of mental settlement? Or?
Mental settlement would be meditation, I think. I have a daughter who was getting quite mentally agitated over various things, and we were out at a very point, and we just stood and I said, come and look at this. We just looked out over the sea, and I just taught her that part 1 exercise, and she's the one that now is doing meditation. And that agitation seems to have gone. So people are under quite a bit of stress. Where I live, in 41 villas, EQC's recommendation is that they all be rebuilt. They're on a concrete foundation, and the concrete foundation has silted. Yeah. You're allowed to have an imperfect foundation, but it's 50 millimeters is the requirement. Ours is the one I live in is 139. So you've got that hanging over you. We've had, in the village I live, we've had about 14 deaths since the earthquake, and I think just the strain. And I've been able to help people just coming to grips with the fact that death isn't the end, it's a passing. I had my next door neighbour, I went in and saw him when he was on his deathbed, and his daughter was there, and I said, I know an very ancient mantra. I'd like to do it for him, and I said, I'll do it for you first, and I'll give you the translation. and if you'd like it done, I'd be happy to do it. And so I did the asatoma to her, and I gave her the English translation, and she said, "Well, look, we'd love you to do it."
That's good.
And I also recently I have a very good friend called John Drew, who was also from the School of Philosophy. And he was the head of the School of Philosophy in Christchurch. He founded the school there. And he passed away. And his wife rang me and said, "Richard, they'd had him, the body cremated. And she asked me if I would be the MC of his memorial service, which I did."
Well, Richard, we have come to the end of the interview.
Yes.
I have one final question for you. If you had to sum up Swami's message in a few words, what it would be?
Well, it is really love all, serve all are one, be alike to everyone. Those are his words, but it does sum up his teaching.
Thank you, Richard, for taking part in this
It's been a great pleasure.
interview.